So I'm going to follow on from Russell around the theme of place, and the title of my presentation is deliberately ambiguous. I think it's been very clearly presented that Glasgow's a city of contrasts, and there are probably more than two cities present in Glasgow in relation to those who have good health, wealth, quality of life, and who live in nice places. But I would like to draw on learning from another city, where myself, Bruce, and another colleague from education went in September, just in relation to what we learnt there around healthy school food policy and travel and transport infrastructure. This was part of a learning exchange, and Bruce has already mentioned that we have a relationship with Gothenburg in terms of comparing what the two cities are like. Just to say a few words about the context for my role, which, as Andrew mentioned, is to work with the local authority, Glasgow City Council in this case, on improving health and wellbeing and reducing inequalities. And this isn't new. Over 30 years ago, the Black Report highlighted the importance of measures to reduce differences in material standards of living in work, in the home and in everyday social and community life. And I've been involved in a very varied portfolio of work. As you can see here, a whole number of different areas of work that I've been lucky to be involved in. But I want to focus in this presentation on two of these areas. One exploring the health impacts of school food policy, and the other exploring trends, patterns and behaviour in active sustainable travel. Both pressing public health priorities, and in one area I feel we've made a discernible impact on policy and practice, and in the other less so, and I'd like to just reflect a bit on that. And throughout the presentation I want to draw on some of our experiences in Gothenburg. So good food, I think we can all agree, is very important for good health. We've been working with Glasgow City Council since 2005 to help them evaluate the impact of some of their healthy school foods policies and programmes. And this was recent coverage in the Sunday Herald of a pilot project in Caledonia Primary School that came about directly as a result of our trip to Gothenburg. And I'll say a bit more about that later in my presentation. So when we looked at how well healthy school food policy was working out in primary schools, what we found was that the physical and social environment were very important. So food is not just fuel. And our research identified that a pleasant, comfortable social environment was very important for primary pupils in terms of eating healthily, but in terms of their enjoyment of lunchtime as a whole. And optimisation of the physical environment was also important. So simple things like drawing the curtains in the dining room to let the sunlight in. Obviously there's some elements of the physical environment you can do less about. This primary school in Sight Hill has now been demolished. But what came through really clearly was that a human touch and humane approaches could actually make a difference. And we found a very similar picture to some extent in Gothenburg. The physical and social environment in Swedish schools is also seen as very important. In primary schools, a family-based approach is used at lunchtime. It's seen as an important part of the school day in terms of learning, in terms of developing social skills. Teachers and pupils sit together and eat together and clear up together. And children as young as 10 are involved in helping in the kitchen and in serving hot food. But there were also some key differences that we noted. And the first is that there's no choice. This was herring, and that's what was on the menu that day. What you do have a choice regarding is how many salads you want to add to your plate on a daily basis. Also, in contrast to what we understand in Glasgow, recycling is taken very seriously in schools in Gothenburg and in the rest of Sweden. And kitchens are very well resourced. So there are resources, obviously seen as important to have a good space for the cooks as well. And a more general reflection on our trip to Gothenburg was it was illuminating to visit a city in a time where public services in the UK are having to defend their legitimacy, and that was touched upon earlier. Public services in Gothenburg are certainly seem much more secure and better resourced. So what did we learn regarding this early research? Well, we learned that things were going well in primary schools. As I've said, physical and social environment, very important. But there were issues. Snacks, what was brought into school, packed lunches and eating out were seen as problematic. And we identified that secondary schools were seen as more of a challenge because more secondary pupils were leaving school at lunchtime. So that's where we turned our attention next. And we got involved in evaluating a pilot project, officially titled The Big Eat-In, unofficially titled The Big Lock-In, which was a pilot project ran over a year in 8 Glasgow secondary schools where secondary 1 pupils who'd just come up from primary school were encouraged. And they were encouraged in some schools. Schools took quite a different approach from one to the next, to stay on site at lunchtime, have lunch, and get involved in a lunchtime activity and have a bit of fun. And what came out of our evaluation was that the benefits went well beyond healthy eating. Parents identified benefits such as less worry about their child leaving school and maybe negotiating crossing busy roads, less worry about bullying. Pupils liked it. The pupils that we spoke to said they felt it took the pressure off them having to go out at lunchtime, and it meant that they could stay in school and they really enjoyed the lunchtime activities, and the teachers really liked it. They felt that it allowed them to get to know pupils better, maybe get to know some pupils that might be struggling, and as you can see from the headline, there was less kind of late returns at lunchtime. And it was the Scottish Centre for Social Research, I should say, to acknowledge, that helped us with this research. However, a common theme that recurred from quite early on in our research was concern amongst parents and school staff around eating out of school and the type of environment that existed near secondary schools. So that's where we decided to turn our attention next. And together with a number of academic colleagues and colleagues from Glasgow City Council, we set out to compare the quality of popular foods consumed by pupils outside school with the type of food that's available within school. And we wanted to try and get a sense of numbers and type of outlets near schools, what outlets were popular with pupils, and then we were going to send a sample of popular foods off for nutrient analysis. This was very much a sort of pilot feasibility study that took place in neighbourhoods around 5 secondaries in Glasgow, and I'm just going to whiz through what we found very quickly. There is a report if you want to read more detail. This is a very typical picture of what's around secondary schools in Glasgow, though there was a great variation in both in numbers and in type of outlets, varying from newsagents to chip shops to sandwich shops to supermarkets to vans, and so, some of the menus could probably have done with a bit of assistance from the pupils in terms of their spelling. But what was also clear was very targeted marketing and promotional strategies aiming at pupils, as the lunchtime market. So, you can, and pupils are very discerning customers. Our observations during our lunchtime of skulking around outside the secondary school, they kind of knew where to go and where to get the best deals. So as I've said, we selected 45 popular savoury food items and sent them off to the lab to compare them directly with what schools have to adhere to in relation to the food they provide on the premises. And along the bottom here, these are all the 45 samples, and you can see the huge variation in terms of fat and saturated fat present in these savoury food items, ranging from lentil soup on the left to doner kebab meat and chips on the right. A bit of an outlier, but a staggering 80 grams of fat present in this meal, which is actually, I think it's your daily recommended fat intake, leaving aside the fact that the recommended fat intake for school lunch on site in school is 26 grams of fat. Chips were very popular. And we wanted to actually analyse, a number of different portions of chips, quite a variation in portion size, but also a big variation in fat, energy, and salt present within these samples. And this graph typifies what we found in relation to energy and salt. So pretty worrying, really. So, what influence has our research in this area had? Well, these are some of the recommendations we've been making. We've been calling for we've been calling for primary school pupils to stay on site. I know it sounds almost unbelievable, but pupils as young as 9 and 10 in some Glasgow primary schools leave school at lunchtime and they go to some of these outlets and they negotiate busy roads while they do it. And city leaders have taken this on board now and are going to start trying to ensure that primary pupils do stay on site during lunchtime. Now, schools aren't the magic bullet, but secondary school stay on site policies are seen as one way of encouraging junior pupils who are in a transitional period to stay on site and eat healthily. So over half of Glasgow secondary schools now have stay on site policies for their junior pupils, and they don't force them to stay on site. They try and encourage them, work with them, etc. We've also been calling for debate and thoughts as to how the external commercial food environment could be made a healthier place. I think food's more topical now than ever before in relation to what might be in some of the food we're eating, horse meat, etc. You know, maybe there should be more public outrage about what's in some of the foods that our young people are eating around schools. Right, I want to move quickly on to another programme of work that myself and several colleagues in the centre have been involved in working on, again since 2005. And it's a three-strand programme of work involving qualitative research to try and understand how and why people travel and move around the way they do. A policy appraisal to see, you know, how well does our policy match up to what's happening on the ground, and also extensive analysis of a number of different data sources to give us an idea of trends and patterns and behaviour in relation to active sustainable travel. And we think this is a very valid area to work on, both in terms of the importance for individual, community and planetary health, and also because of its disproportionate negative impact on vulnerable groups such as the very young, the very old and people who don't have cars. And in relation to the qualitative data, what came through quite clearly is that current sort of perceptions and expectations around convenience, safety, time and cost often lead people to travel less actively than they would otherwise. So these are just some quotes that typify some of the responses we got. So a comment about, it's easier actually to get the bus. Another comment about safety, which came through very clearly. People had a lot to say about safety and also had a lot to say about bus travel and how they would like to see it improved around the city. And again, time, we're all short of time, and people have lots of things to try and do in their daily lives. In relation to the policy and strategy, well, we've got lots of fantastic policy and strategy, and it says all the right things in relation to the importance of walking and cycling in particular. But what we found was that when we actually looked at the translation of aspiration into reality on the ground, there was much less evidence of local authority action plans following through on this and setting targets and outcomes that actually introduced change. And our data analysis kind of backed this up, that in general, and we'll be looking forward to what the latest census data tell us, but trends are moving in the wrong direction, have been moving in the wrong direction. Car usage has been going up inexorably over the last 20, 30 years. And we have inequalities in relation to travel, higher levels of active travel among less affluent groups of the population, and higher levels of car usage amongst people who are richer. And we also have an inequality in relation to road traffic injuries. There's a five-fold difference in road pedestrian injuries between more affluent and less affluent areas in Glasgow. However, some glimmers of hope. Cycling, and I'm a cyclist, so I'm quite pleased about this, is going up in the city. We're not quite sure why, but this graph just shows that cycle journeys in and out of the city centre seem to be going up. And just to return back to Gothenburg, when we went to Gothenburg, it's a city of a similar population, similar urban design, and it has a similar post-industrial heritage to Glasgow. But what we found there was a vastly superior public transport and active travel infrastructure. There's an integrated travel card system. You use it on a bus, tram, train, ferry. You travel free if you're a school pupil or if you're over 60, and they've even got Boris's bikes. So what struck us there was that investment and priority given to travel and transport infrastructure was much more prominent. In terms of cycling, 10% of all journeys are made by bike in Gothenburg, and that's what we're aspiring towards in Glasgow at the moment by 2020. There are 200 kilometres of segregated cycle lanes, and you can see for yourself the number of bikes that are around. However, I think there's glimmers of hope in Glasgow. We've now seeing introduction of segregated cycle lanes. We have the Commonwealth Games and a lot of infrastructural changes, improvements to the walking environment being made. So that's good news. But, we could aspire towards cities like Gothenburg if we really want to make a difference to how we travel. And I suppose we've been scratching our heads as to, why it's been so difficult to influence this agenda. We've produced reports, briefing papers, we've submitted evidence to parliamentary inquiries, consultations, we've made films, we've held seminars, but we still feel that we haven't managed to have as much impact on this agenda as we have on school food policy, for instance. And maybe it's about national versus local control, maybe it's just a different vision of what a livable city looks like. I'll await some thoughts or comments on that. So just to tie up this presentation, in terms of thinking about what's helped in relation to the work that I've been involved in, and in terms of thinking about the future, working with others has just been so important, and I think that's something that we're all very, very clear about. And building reciprocity, agendas that are common, that provide common interests. I've talked a bit about learning from Gothenburg, but we've been able to learn a heck of a lot from elsewhere. The London Health Commission informed the development of the Glasgow Health Commission. From word to deed is one of the kind of headline statements in a recent report we were sent from our Gothenburg colleagues, which is talking about their environmental and transport priorities for the region for the future. So action speaking louder than words. And I suppose final sort of thought is maybe it's the right time for an issue. Horse meat in our foods has really awakened the public consciousness around what we might actually be eating. But in relation to the Oxfam Humankind Index, which myself and Bruce were involved in helping develop, they asked people what made life good for them. And as well as physical and mental health, people talked about affordable, decent homes, attractive, clean neighbourhoods, and access to green and wild spaces. So I think it just backs up, the importance of people-friendly places in the creation of better health. Thank you.